The moon is an odd object in this array.
If this is true, we have already dated the surface of the moon. It's 4.5 billion years old.
What if one of the world's greatest Nobel Prize-winning scientists discovered something near the moon that no one was ever meant to see? Harold Urey, a respected NASA insider and a man deeply devoted to science, left behind secret notes describing strange movements, artificial patterns, and a growing fear that the truth could shatter everything we believe about space and the universe itself. What exactly did he find, and why was it hidden for decades? Let's uncover the mystery. The Confession of Harold Urey. Near the end of his long, brilliant career, something changed in Harold Urey. The Nobel-winning chemist who helped explain how planets form began talking about things that made even his friends uneasy. What could scare a mind like his? And why did he hint that the moon isn't what we think it is? Harold Urey wasn't some wild theorist chasing strange ideas. He was the man who helped shape modern chemistry itself. Born in Indiana in 1893, he became famous for discovering deuterium, a heavier form of hydrogen that changed how scientists understood atoms, stars, and even how planets begin. That discovery won him the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1934, and from then on, Urey's voice carried weight across every major field of science. He studied how worlds form, how matter builds life, and how the universe grows. So when NASA began planning its first journeys to the moon, they called Urey. They wanted his mind, his questions, and his eye for the things others might miss. Urey's involvement with the Apollo program was key to the mission, as he helped determine what lunar samples could reveal about the early solar system. He thought that studying moon rocks would let us peer billions of years into the past. But what set him apart was his willingness to question the data that others ignored. When early telescope observations revealed strange light flashes, moving shadows, or bright streaks on the moon's surface, anomalies recorded by reputable astronomers long before Apollo, most scientists dismissed them as optical illusions or equipment errors. Urey, however, refused to look away. "The things we don't understand," he once said, "are usually the things most worth studying." His colleagues described him as restless when data didn't fit established models. To Urey, every anomaly was a message waiting to be decoded, not discarded. This curiosity was what made him a genius, but it was also what began to isolate him. As the space race intensified, NASA and the US government were focused on beating the Soviets to the moon. There was little patience for distractions, and even less for speculation. Urey's growing fascination with unexplained lunar phenomena began to clash with the tightly controlled narrative of progress and triumph. By the mid-1960s, something shifted in the scientist's tone. In letters and recorded interviews, he began to voice his unease with how science was evolving, or, as he saw it, narrowing. He warned of selective vision, the tendency of scientists to ignore evidence that challenges the majority view. In one conversation, he said that science had become too political, too protective of its own authority. "We only see what we're prepared to see," he wrote, referring to the moon. He claimed that there were things in the lunar data that did not fit the model of a dead, inert rock. He was particularly disturbed by the consistency of certain reports, lights observed in the same regions, patterns that repeated, geometric shadows that shouldn't have been there. What started as scientific curiosity began to border on obsession. Colleagues recalled that Urey spoke about the moon with an intensity that bordered on fear. He privately complained that NASA was overlooking evidence of dynamic activity on the lunar surface, movements and flashes that couldn't be explained by reflection or meteor impacts. He accused his peers of intellectual cowardice, arguing that they were protecting their reputations instead of confronting what the evidence might imply. As Urey aged, his behavior and actions became more concerning. Several of his personal notes, later referenced by colleagues and historians, suggests that he had come to believe the moon's anomalies were not random. He wrote cryptic remarks about structured activity and deliberate formations visible in certain telescopic photographs. One memo described an area of the moon that seems almost too arranged to be natural. And finally, he wrote one mysterious line that no one has been able to answer yet. "This is what we feared the most." What exactly did he fear? Was it the idea that the moon might bear evidence of artificial structures? Could it be the remains of ancient technology or something darker? One interpretation suggests that Urey was warning about the psychological impact of discovery. He once hinted that the revelation of non-natural activity on another world could collapse the boundary between science and myth, undoing centuries of progress built on the assumption that humanity was alone in shaping its environment. Another view is that his fear was institutional, that revealing too much would erode public trust in scientific authority, already strained by Cold War secrecy. And there is a third, more unsettling possibility that Urey genuinely believed something intelligent had left its mark on the moon, and that the scientific community, knowingly or not, was helping to keep it hidden. As the 1970s approached, Urey became increasingly withdrawn. He continued his research but avoided public speculation. To some, this silence looked like humility. To others, it felt like fear. Those who knew him well say he became anxious whenever the subject of the moon arose, as though the topic carried a weight he no longer wanted to bear. In his final years, he spoke little of his early optimism about exploration. Instead, he hinted that humanity's greatest discoveries might also be its greatest dangers. Harold Urey died in 1981, leaving behind an enormous legacy and a small trail of unanswered questions. Among them was his whispered suggestion that the moon, that ancient satellite we thought we understood, might not be as empty or natural as we believed. Whatever the truth behind his fears may be, they haunted him until the end. The science of lunar anomalies. In 2024, scientists discovered something that left even NASA stunned. A colossal, unexplained structure buried deep beneath the moon's South Pole Aitken Basin. This mass anomaly weighs billions of tons and stretches for hundreds of kilometers, yet no one can say what it is. Is this what Harold Urey was warning us about all along? And could this discovery finally be the proof he feared, that the moon is far from dead? Centuries before Urey ever peered through a telescope, astronomers were already reporting that something strange was happening on the lunar surface. Since the early 1600s, professional observers have documented what came to be called transient lunar phenomena, or TLPS, brief, localized flashes of light, strange color changes, and shifting shadows seen on the moon. Some lasted only a few seconds, others for several minutes, and many appeared in the same locations repeatedly. A well-known example is the Aristarchus crater, where glowing red and blue lights have been reported hundreds of times across centuries. Even respected astronomers like William Herschel and Patrick Moore logged these sightings, insisting they weren't visual errors. Yet most of the scientific community brushed them aside as illusions, caused by atmospheric distortion or human error. Harold Urey disagreed. He often said that anomalies were signals disguised as noise, and that ignoring them was like throwing away data because it was inconvenient. He believed the moon, unlike Earth, had preserved billions of years of unaltered history precisely because it lacked atmosphere, wind, and erosion. That meant every crater, every mark, every unexplained flash was part of its permanent record. His conviction gained strange support during the Apollo missions of the late 1960s and early 1970s. In 1969, after Apollo 12 and later Apollo 13 deliberately crashed spent lunar modules onto the moon's surface to test seismic reactions, the results shocked mission scientists. The moon rang like a bell, reverberating for nearly an hour, a behavior unlike anything seen on Earth. NASA's official explanation was that the moon's structure was unusually rigid and dry, causing vibrations to travel differently through rock, but Urey and others weren't convinced. Because if you think about it, if the moon is as solid and natural as believed, why did it react as though it were hollow or internally fractured in a uniform way? Then there were the mascons, short for mass concentrations, which is a term used to describe localized regions of unusually dense material hidden beneath the surface, first detected by lunar orbiters in the 1960s. They caused spacecraft trajectories to shift in unpredictable ways, almost as if invisible gravity wells were tugging at them. For years, scientists couldn't explain how these anomalies formed. Even today, mascons remain partially mysterious. They are thought to be remnants of massive impacts or magma flows, yet the precision and consistency of their distribution puzzle researchers. Urey was among the first to argue that these mass anomalies might indicate complex, layered structures beneath the moon's crust. Apollo also brought back lunar rocks that deepened the mystery. Radiometric dating showed many samples were older than Earth's surface crust, some by more than 1 billion years. This contradicted the prevailing theory that the moon formed when a Mars-sized object struck early Earth, ejecting debris that later coalesced. If the moon was younger, it should have contained fewer ancient materials, not more. Urey saw this as confirmation that the moon was anomalous by design, in the sense that its age and makeup didn't match the expectations of natural planetary formation. Add to this the strange duality of lunar geology, evidence of both violent volcanic activity and complete dormancy, and Urey's discomfort only grew. The moon appeared at once ancient and active. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the evidence hasn't gotten any simpler. Recent missions have found that the moon's magnetic field is uneven and puzzling. Some regions still hold traces of magnetism, suggesting the presence of powerful electrical currents billions of years ago. Currents that shouldn't have existed in such a small, geologically inactive body. In 2024, researchers confirmed that these magnetic patches correspond to anomalies and unusual alignments, hinting that the moon once hosted unknown electromagnetic processes. Even more striking is the South Pole Aitken mass anomaly, a dense, metallic object buried hundreds of kilometers underground, possibly larger than Hawaii. Its exact nature remains unknown, and while one theory attributes it to the remains of a gigantic asteroid, others note that its size and compactness don't match known impact models. Urey had long predicted that the moon contained records of unnatural density, and while he never used the term artificial, his phrasing now feels strangely meaningful. Meanwhile, the old reports of TLPS have gained new life. With advanced telescopes and high-speed cameras, modern astronomers have confirmed that the moon still produces momentary flashes, color shifts, and localized glows. These are often observed near craters like Aristarchus, Plato, and Kepler, the same regions flagged in historical records. Some flashes are now attributed to micro-impacts or gas release events called outgassing, but others defy consistent explanation. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has recorded transient light emissions that don't correspond to meteor strikes or known geological activity. The moon, it seems, continues to speak, just as Urey said it would, revealing traces of activity that don't align with a dead world. Even its dust appears alive. Electrostatic levitation, a process in which tiny particles lift and drift above the lunar surface due to electrical charges from sunlight, has been observed on multiple missions. This creates a constant, shifting haze at the horizon, a phenomenon Apollo astronauts reported seeing as a lunar twilight glow. Though this effect is physical, not supernatural, it reinforces Urey's belief that the moon is a dynamic system recording subtle forces and interactions we still don't fully understand. Of course, not everyone agrees with Urey's interpretations. Many scientists argue that these phenomena, from mascons to TLPS, have logical, natural explanations, gravitational layering, solar wind, meteor impacts, or instrument artifacts. And in many cases, those explanations may be right. But Harold Urey's warnings were actually about how we shouldn't get too complacent with what we think we know. The truth is that ignoring irregular data prevents discovery. By dismissing the unexplainable, science risks turning a blind eye to its most important clues. In the end, Urey's claim was not that aliens lived on the moon. It was that something genuine, measurable, and unacknowledged was taking place there. A truth still hidden within its craters, its dust, and its silence. The moon, once thought lifeless, may be far more complex and far more revealing than we ever imagined. Hidden activity, or human blindness. In 2023, a short piece of footage recorded from Monterrey, Mexico, began circulating across scientific forums and social media. At first glance, it looked ordinary, the moon bright and pale against a clear afternoon sky. But when the camera zoomed in, the ordinary dissolved into something far more disturbing. 3 small dark objects appeared near the lunar surface. They moved with direction, gliding in unison, in paths that were smooth, deliberate, and perfectly aligned. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. Amateur astronomers around the world analyzed the footage frame by frame. Some claimed the objects cast faint shadows, suggesting real physical presence near the moon. Others dismissed it as optical interference or debris in near-Earth orbit. But what unsettled researchers most was the timing. The event was captured during daylight, with the moon illuminated against a bright blue sky. That specific condition, daylight visibility, matched exactly what Harold Urey had emphasized decades earlier, that certain lunar anomalies were most visible when the moon was observed in daylight, when glare from the atmosphere filtered out the harsh contrast of night. But can you think of an answer to how a random video from the 21st century could so precisely mirror the conditions Urey described long before digital photography existed? NASA and other space agencies quickly addressed the incident, suggesting that the objects were likely satellites, fragments of debris, or imaging artifacts caused by the camera's sensor. These are reasonable explanations after all. Near-Earth space is filled with thousands of orbiting objects. But even so, the Monterrey footage reignited an old unease. If this was merely a visual glitch, why did it appear consistent across multiple lenses and cameras? And why did it resemble reports that go back not just years, but centuries? What Urey called artificial activity has become the most debated phrase associated with his name. But what did he actually mean by it? To most scientists, artificial implies deliberate design, the work of technology or intelligence. Yet Urey never claimed to have proof of extraterrestrial builders. His warning was more subtle and perhaps more profound. He wanted science to consider that not everything resembling design is necessarily alien, but neither is it meaningless. He believed that the moon might host processes or structures that mimicked artificial order, created either by ancient natural mechanisms or by forces humanity has not yet recognized. One interpretation, of course, is the simplest, that artificial refers to human activity. Today, our skies are crowded with satellites, spacecraft, and secret experiments. Classified projects from the Cold War era, many still undisclosed, placed objects in lunar orbit for surveillance and data gathering. It's possible that some modern sightings, including the Monterrey footage, capture remnants or reflections of these technologies. If so, Urey's fears might have been misplaced, but his message wouldn't be. Because even then, he was right about one thing. We rarely admit what we can't explain, especially when explanation might lead to uncomfortable truths about power, secrecy, and control. A second interpretation is more scientific, yet no less unsettling, that there are unknown natural processes on the moon that imitate intentional motion. Electrostatic dust storms, Magnetic discharges and particle reflections can produce patterns that appear organized to human eyes. These could be mistaken for objects, but might in fact be complex natural interactions between sunlight, magnetism, and lunar dust. If so, Urey's point remains. The Moon is not a dead world. It is active, reactive, and constantly evolving in ways that defy our assumptions. And then there is the speculative frontier, the interpretation that Urey himself hinted at but never declared aloud. What if some of these phenomena are genuinely artificial in the truest sense of the word? What if the Moon, a place long assumed barren, is being observed, utilized, or altered by intelligence that is non-human in origin? Urey's fears that he wrote about were actually about the role and perception of science. If people learned that official narratives had possibly ignored or concealed data, confidence in scientific bodies would collapse. Worse still, he feared that science might lose its moral compass, becoming a gatekeeper rather than a seeker of truth. In his private notes, he implied that some knowledge might be too disruptive for humanity to process all at once, not because it was supernatural, but because it shattered our sense of order. This raises a deeper question: should every truth be revealed? History shows that when humans confront paradigm-shifting discoveries, denial often comes first. We once refused to believe Earth orbited the Sun, that germs caused disease, or that atoms could split. In each case, knowledge came at the cost of uprooting what we already knew. Urey may have sensed this same pattern repeating in space science, that the greatest barrier to understanding the Moon wasn't distance or technology, but human fear of change. His final years were marked by anxiety, as if he carried the burden of a revelation too heavy for disclosure. Perhaps he understood that knowledge, once released, can't be contained. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.